Good day to all the viewers at home, and welcome to a new thing brought to you by the Global Business Roundtable. My name is Sipho Mseleku, the convener of the Global Business Roundtable and your host for today. The Global Business Roundtable is a Christ-centered, multi-denominational, multicultural and multiracial organization focused on the holistic development of its members in line with God's purpose for their lives. GBR focuses on the kingship of Christ and not only on the priesthood of Christ. It encourages its members to influence and take over the mountains of society, including spiritual, religion, education, economy and finance, science and technology, sports, arts and culture, politics and government, family and societal issues. The name of the show is taken from the book of Isaiah 43, verse 18 to 19. Forget the former things. Do not dwell in the past. See, I am doing a new thing. It springs forth. Do you not perceive it? Today we are discussing the legal implications of marriage and the different marital regimes that are available to people who are married and those who want to get married. But before we get onto this topic, I'd like to introduce my panel. And starting from my extreme left, I have Mr Ntsako Baloyi. He's a lawyer by profession and also a head of Department for Future Leaders of GBR in South Africa. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Immediately next to him, we have Madam Hlamarisa Ndaba. She's an attorney and also a director at Ndaba Incorporated. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
On my right, immediate right, I have Miss Valencia Risaba. She's a group general manager at Smile Communication. Welcome, madam.
Thank you, sir.
On my extreme right, I have Mr. Matjie. He's a motivational speaker and a marriage counselor. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Excellency.
Thank you very much for agreeing to participate in this program. Before we start with the questions we have and the discussion, I would give you a minute each to briefly introduce yourself, your highlights of your career, what you do, and whatever information you want to share with the viewers.
Thank you. My name is Ntsako Baloyi. I am originally from an information technology background. I have since qualified also in law. I do research trying to combine computer science and law. And I'm also the National Future Leader in South Africa, head for Future Leaders.
Thank you. Your Excellency.
Good day. My name is Hlamarisa Ndaba. I'm an attorney by profession, and I'm running a law firm that deals with all legal issues as a whole.
Thank you. Your Excellency.
Thank you, sir. My name is Valencia Risaba. I'm also a lawyer by profession. I've been in the legal profession for about going on to 18 years now. I'm currently the head of legal for an international telecommunications company.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency.
Good day, Your Excellencies. My name is Thabo Matjie. I am called to the Ministry of Motivational Speaking, Relationships and Marriage.
Thank you. Let's just get straight to it. What is the legal definition of marriage? And what are the elements that constitute a marriage, a valid marriage? What are the different types of marital regimes that are available out there in law, which people can choose when they decide to get married? Why is it important for people to understand these marital regimes? And many people just get married without understanding that there are implications to any marital regime they choose. And I'm sure in this episode you'll be able to help them. Who wants to start?
I can start. Let me start by saying that the legal perspective we'll be giving today will be based on the South African legal system.
Okay.
And international viewers can be able to adapt their views to their own legal systems. Marriage is basically a union which is put together that must comply to a particular system. We've got various marital property regimes. We've got marriage in community of property, marriage out of community of property with accrual, marriage out of community of property without accrual, and we also have got customary marriages.
Yeah, but you've just highlighted them in broad terms. I'm sure we'll be able to get in detail as to what does it mean to be married in community of property, what does it mean to be married out of community with accrual, out of community without accrual, and also what does it mean to be married in under customary law. I don't know if you want to come in on those questions we asked.
Okay. Basically, all these marital regimes are available for one to choose from. Being married in terms of customary law means that you are married, and the marriage itself, the way it was concluded, it's in a way which has to conform to a particular custom. And being married in terms of civil right means that you either married in community of property, which means that when you married in community of property, your estate or whatever you own and whatever that your partner owns now becomes one thing and become a joint estate. And the implication of that is that throughout the course of the marriage, there's nothing like these are my own things. There are certain decisions that you will not take solely without the consent of your partner. Like maybe selling one of the houses that you guys both own. It does not even matter as to what extent has the other party contributed into the joint estate. It becomes one. Like the Bible will say, a man will leave his mother and be joined to his wife, and they become one thing. So the implications of in community of property is that whatever that you come with, it be your debts, it be your bad financial credit rating, it be whatever asset that you've accumulated. When you come into the marriage, we say this joint estate, this pool now owes this much. This pool now owns this much. We don't look at it in an individual context of saying so-and-so has contributed this much, so-and-so has contributed that much.
Everything is matched into one estate from the day you get married. You want to come in there?
Yes, thank you. Just before we move into the different regimes of different marital regimes, I think the important question to answer, which would have been your very first question as to what is a marriage.
Yes.
The important thing to recognize is the fact that in the definition, in the legal definition of a marriage, there are certain formalities that have to apply, and that would determine the consequences that flow from the arrangement of the marriage. And in certain customary marriages, you'd find there have been cases where people had to prove the actual existence of the fact that they've been married. Yeah.
Yes.
And we'll get to those as the discussion progresses. But the critical aspect in answering the question of what is a marriage is primarily because of the mostly commercial implications that flow from a marriage. And as Hlamarisa has already explained, there's a marriage in community of property. That's one broad category. The other category is a marriage out of community of property. And there you'd have broadly two variations. The one is where you have an antenuptial contract, and the other is where you don't have an antenuptial contract. Where you don't have an antenuptial contract, it's a regime whereby what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine. We're just in this for the association or to play together. Where there's an antenuptial contract is where you have a clearly distinctive document that sets out the legal implications that you want to apply to your particular union. And where it becomes relevant is mostly at the end of the marriage, and partly as to how you conduct your affairs during the period of the marriage. So for example, if it's out of community of property, it means you do with whatever is yours as you please. And when the marriage dissolves, everyone takes whatever belongs to them. Where you have an antenuptial contract, you can then determine what exactly you want to apply. We own the house together, but we don't own everything else. There's an accrual system where you can say we own everything that we acquire together within the duration of, within the persistence of the marriage. But if I brought my Lamborghini, it's mine, and whatever else you brought is yours.
Yeah, we'll come into details on this, because I don't want us to run on them fast, because these implications are very serious.
Critical, yeah.
What's your, we've got a minute to wrap up this, then I just come in there on the definition, legal definition of marriage and the points you want to make.
Thank you, Your Excellency. In my case, I'm very glad that as people we are spoiled for choice when it comes to the issues of marriage. As they've explained, there are different types of marriage regimes which one can get involved in. With me, I'm more inclined to the one that involves the man, the wife, and God.
Yes.
Which we call a covenant.
Yeah.
That one, for me, takes precedence over all, because the others that have been explained basically are the law of the land, which is to govern what happens in the land. So therefore, as children of God, which marriage contract do we subscribe to first before we can go to these other marriage contracts? That is what matters the most to me.
Okay, I think I agree with you that we deliberately chose the topic to be legal implications of marriage. The spiritual implications of marriage, that is a subject for another episode, because we really need to look into that. There are vast implications spiritually, because God is the author and the creator of marriage. But we want to help people who are married out there without even understanding the spiritual implications, just the legal implications of marriage. And you're sitting here, you want to get married, you've been married, the law of the land applies to you, either because of choice for each marital regime, or by default, or by ignorance of the law. You find yourself falling in one marital regime or another. And you mentioned that there's marriage in community of property, there's marriage in out of community of property with ANC, antenuptial contract, and there's marriage out of community of property without accrual. And we want to now dwell deep into the differences in these and the implications of each. Let's look for now at the marriage within community of property, as to what are the implications, what are the consequences, and when does these consequences come through. And I think this is very, very important. You said earlier on that when you choose this marital regime, the day you get married, the estates of the two individuals are matched into one, both assets and liabilities. In other words, this is where somebody can, if you're married to a millionaire or a billionaire, you instantly become a millionaire or billionaire. If you're married to a pauper, you may instantly become one. If, say, you're married to a person who comes with substantial debts to the marriage, it will affect you, because day one, those debts become yours, and in equal, undivided shares. And I think that's the understanding. So let's look into this. What are the implications of this marital regime in detail? And the implications come, I'm sure, at the end of the marriage, on death, when one party dies, or when parties choose to separate or to divorce. And then that's where they come into effect. What exactly are these implications? Are they in relation to creditors, in relation to your business, in relation to when you sign contracts, in relation to all those kinds of things? What are they? Who wants to come in first? You want to come in?
Yes, Your Excellency. There's this type of marriage contract. It's very crucial, because you look at a whole lot of people, especially in the Christian community, if I may say, that is one of the contracts which they are advised to actually go into, and sometimes without the knowledge and the deeper implications of what could happen should something in an unfortunate event happen, like maybe death or even separation. So it's very important that when one says, I agree to marry in community of property, they are fully aware of what they're getting themselves into. Because in most cases, we look at the fact that we love one another, and then we're thinking everything should actually just fall in place because of the marriage contract itself. Whereas we also, not to say we are expecting bad things to happen, but you also need to know that should I need to buy a house tomorrow, should I need to buy a car, or should I need to go into business, will the bank be able to assist me with finance if maybe I'm married to somebody who is not, who does not have a credibility? You know, the credit profile is not in good terms. So I believe we need to dwell deeper in terms of when you go in there, like you have said, you are taking what this person has and what they are bringing into the marriage, and therefore you have to deal with everything and the implications of that decision. So
Yes.
it's very, very
I
important.
think that's very important. The question I would like to have is that, are there some disclosure requirements before people get married to say, list your assets and list your liabilities? Who are your debtors? Who are your creditors? And how much do you owe them? So that people know in advance. And some people may be delinquents or about to be sequestrated. And if you are sequestrated, if one partner is by implication, the other gets sequestrated, which means you will never be able to manage your own affairs. And a trustee or somebody else would have to be appointed to manage your legal affairs. And therefore, if it's a man that has got into that situation, automatically the wife also, bank's accounts and everything gets frozen. They're all managed by a trustee. So are there requirements for disclosures? The counselors, you counsel people, do you counsel them to say disclose your financial affairs to your partner? Or people just get married blindly? You want to come in here?
Yes, thanks. There's legally no formal requirement for disclosure, and that is where the issue of proper advice before people decide to get married becomes very important. And I think one of the misconceptions and there's a stigmatization of a marriage anything other than in community of property, like my colleague has said.
What causes that?
There's a
And is that a right?
stigmatization in terms of if you want to marry out of community of property, you're being greedy, you're protecting your assets, maybe you have an ace up your sleeve, you have something to hide. I think the reality is when people decide which regime to go for, it should be based on a variety of considerations that have to be made and critically have to be discussed between the parties. There's no legal requirement to disclose. However, you find that where it's two people who are generally employed, it becomes less complicated than it would be where the people that are getting married, one is a business person who takes risks, or who inherently, by virtue of the way they earn a living, become risky in terms of they're likely to get into legal disputes, into litigations, part of their assets are likely to be foreclosed upon and those kinds of things. So those are some of the considerations that people have to take into account. Because when you get into a marriage in community of property, what you are effectively saying is that for all intents and purposes, from a legal point of view, you'll be treated as a unit. So if there's a debt to be taken up, it would be treated as a joint debt. Where the marriage is going to dissolve, then the assets would be divided into half. Would be divided equally into half, irrespective of who brought what or who's responsible for whatever the reason of the marriage, the reason of the breakup is. Which then there's a technical legal issue in terms of saying you can argue for forfeiture of benefits. So the general principle is we own everything jointly, equally. When we separate, the estate gets divided equally. There's an argument to be made in terms of saying where the one party can prove that the other was responsible for the breakdown of the marriage, then the innocent spouse, so to speak, can argue for forfeiture of benefits. And then it becomes a complex legal process as well. So I think the considerations have to be the economic realities in terms of how you earn a living. There has to also, although we don't get married to get divorced, the fact of the reality of the legal costs that would come into being if, for example, the one spouse had to prove that the other needs to forfeit their benefits. It becomes a cumbersome legal process.
Yeah.
And it might be worth considering at the beginning of the marriage to avoid such things. But it's basically, there must be an informed decision, I think critically. There must be a consideration of, we love each other, but we have risky ways of earning a living, and let's try and mitigate against the possibility of conflict at the end. In terms of the pension funds law in South Africa, when you separate and you are married in community of property, there's also a provision whereby the value of the pension fund as at the date of the dissolution of the marriage part of it would vest into
The other spouse.
So those are some of the considerations that have to be made. And I think the mistake that people make, and where the stigmatization comes from, would be from an emotional decision around these matters, and it shouldn't be an emotional decision. It has to be pragmatic and forward-looking. And part of your estate planning, I think generally that's how we should
It's very
all
important.
view it.
Yes, yeah. So this is very, very important for people to understand that there are legal implications. So therefore, it's important for people to be to be morally open to each other about what they bring into the marriage and about the implications if anything goes wrong. So we also want to look now about these implications on death or divorce, where now the estate has to be separated and into two. If you are married in community of property and you said the estate is divided equally, 50% to one partner and 50% to another. And the same applies on death, that each spouse get their own 50%. And that when you write a will, you're writing on your own estate, not on the estate of the other spouse. So what are these implications that we want to deal with, especially post-death? And also what happens if you die without a will? So maybe we can start with you and come through again and deal with this.
Thank you. I think it's very important to appreciate the fact that things like your divorce and death do happen. In fact, divorce may be a choice, but death is not. So we need to think of what are the actual implications of these marital property regimes, especially because in South Africa it's the default marital property regime, unless proven otherwise, which means unless you've got an antenuptial contract and so forth. So it's very key to understand what then are the implications when the person dies or when there's a divorce.
So you said it's a default marital regime. What do you mean by that?
It means, if you don't know probably what marital regime property you are into, you are probably married in community of property. So in our law, you are presumed to be married in community of property unless proven otherwise.
Thank you for the clarification.
So if you have not had a choice, for instance, you just think you went to church and you were married, or you went and signed, you are married in community of property. So you need to really know what are the implications.
So you have to make a choice before marriage, and it must be explicit that you are married out of community of property.
Precisely.
And with accrual or not. If you don't have an antenuptial contract, you are deemed to be married in community of property.
Precisely.
Thank you for the clarification.
And let me just say that there are cases where marrying out of community of property may be ideal. We should not demonize marriage out of community of property. So in looking at marriage in community of property and the legal implications at death, for instance, if you die without a will, what then happens is that the estate needs to be divided into two. So you're 50% and the other spouse is 50%. And with the other spouse's 50%, there's no question about it. It's their portion that they're entitled to. With the person that died, their estate, depending on whether they have children or not, the way our interstate succession law works, which means the law that applies if you do not have a will, the way it works is that, let's assume you have got 3 children at death. The wife is, assuming the wife is still alive, has received their 50% share, which is undisputed. And then on the other 50% that belongs to me now, what happens is that we look at that and say we have 3 children, that the wife must be counted as two children. So we must divide my half estate by 5, because we've got 3 children and a wife who becomes two child portion. Okay? And that is how then we divide the balance of the estate, interstate.
Yes, but interstate is much more deeper than that and complex than that.
Yes.
That is Interstate Succession Act. You first say if you have a will, your estate will be distributed in accordance to your wishes, as you've written in your will. That is, of course, if your will is valid.
Yes.
And the second part is that if you die without a will, then the Interstate Succession Act applies, which will then prescribe how your estate is distributed to your heirs. Of course, starting with your wife and children. If no wife, no children, and then to the immediate relatives, descendants, no descendants, I think ascendants, no ascendants, siblings, no siblings, then it goes to government, something like that. So I think that process people need to know, and because its implication is that it's important to die with a will, to always have a valid will that will govern how your estate is distributed on death. So it's not automatic that because you are married in community of property, your estate will go to your wife, to the surviving spouse. So you have to put it on paper through a will that it will happen like that. Do you want to add there?
Yeah, just in when we're concluding discussing this matrimonial regime, there's just a misconception that I would want to clarify.
Yeah.
That when you are, any type of a marital regime that you choose will only affect you in marriage. Well, that can be true with other matrimonial regimes, like out of community of property with the accrual system. But with marriage in community of property, it becomes your everyday reality. I want to buy a car, I have to get, and I want to apply finance for that vehicle. My husband has to come in
and sign.
So a lot of decisions, of which, Mrs. Risaba has already stated, becomes complex when you find out that you are someone who's in business. Because a lot of things that you might do, you might find out that you have to stand surety for your business. And then it becomes a bit complex. So with marriage in community of property, its implications play a role into your day-to-day life, all the decisions that you're taking. And another thing that I want to add on is that when parties when parties are married, it in community of property, then it means that they have to live with the reality of that decision every day, as opposed to other marital regimes where the reality of what the legal implication of your marriage only comes into place when the marriage has to be dissolved, either by divorce or by death.
Is this part of pre-counseling, premarital counseling by marriage counselors, and to just explain to people that if you get married outside of the spiritual implications, these are the practical implications of marriage and the different marital regimes and the implications of that. Are marriage counselors equipped to deal with that?
Ideally, it should be. But whether they are equipped or not, it's another issue.
Thing, yes.
Because we cannot only look at the spiritual implication when it comes to marriage. And as he has said, that by default, when you go to church and announce to your pastor that you're getting married, then it is assumed that you're getting married in community of property. And a whole lot of people are scared to even come forth and say, I need to marry out of community of property for 1, 2, 3, 4 reasons. Because therefore, like he said, it's more like you don't understand the marriage in its entirety, or else they demonize all these other marriage contracts. And I believe that when somebody comes for counseling and say, we are getting married, we start from the openness part of things, from the foundation of love, you know, and then coming into the natural as well, you know, financially. Are you in a good position to start on a good foundation for this marriage? Now, if you find that one perhaps is having a whole lot of debts and the other one it is not, and you find that perhaps even the individuals themselves, they want to get married in community of property, if you don't have an answer or else to assist them in terms of making a decision, it's always important to refer them to a professional, a legal advisor. You tell them all the spiritual part of it and then take them to the legal advisor, because the spiritual part is just the foundation of how things should be done. But now when we come to the legalities of it, if we don't understand as counselors, we cannot say, but by default, you are a child of God and you have to be married in community of property. Then you find that people struggle after they get married because they cannot do anything thereafter. They cannot acquire any assets because we believe this is how marriage should be, but we should allow them a choice. We shouldn't decide for them.
Exactly.
We should give them as you've got different choices.
Yes,
so therefore, if you feel that from a spiritual point of view, it makes sense for you to choose this marriage contract, go for it. But if you think you still need legal advice, please consult the
legal
legalities.
experts.
Yes.
I think counselors should be trained on all these different marital regimes, and also give the spiritual guidance, and so that people have options. I think it's always better when people make informed decisions. Where counselors do not have further details, they can refer those people to experts to clarify. But now I want us to get into the issue of the marriage in community, out of community of property without accrual. Let's start with that one because it's easy, and then we'll wrap up with the one which is with accrual. You know, what are the difference and what are the benefits and the disadvantage of marrying in out of community without accrual? You had started briefly, maybe you can come in here.
Okay.
Briefly, we have a minute, we'll come back into detail.
Okay. A marriage out of community of property without accrual is purely there's a pure separation of assets
and liabilities.
and estates and liabilities between the two spouses. Just from a jurisprudential point of view, the history that we have in South Africa is in the very olden days, when a customary marriage would take place, it would be assumed to be in community of property, and the husband had what was called marital power over the woman, and the husband would be vested with all authority to deal in whatever manner he wishes with all the assets of the estate. And I think the marriage out of community of property is a liberating factor to women, and I'm probably stepping out of the topic, but it's a liberating dispensation that's now available to say what's yours, it's yours, what's mine, it's mine. Not to say there's no love, but it brings that flexibility without taking away the reality of the fact that we are married, we love each other, we cooperate in the way we run our affairs in the marriage. So it's a pure separation, and that applies when the marriage ends, whether it's by way of divorce or death. There's a complete separation.
We are wrapping up now. If you can come in and tell us more about the accrual system, marriage out of community of property with accrual system. Your Excellency, maybe touch briefly on customary law and whether we can change the marital regime and what is required to do so, and also the things that do not form part of the estate, of the joint estate, regardless of what marital regime you are married into. And then you can give us a final word of advice to the viewers and your spiritual guidance on this. Let's start with accrual.
Okay. The basic premise of the accrual system is that there's a valuation of the estates of both parties that come into a marriage. And the basic premise is that whatever you came into the marriage with would ideally be kept as your part of the estate, and whatever this couple acquires as part of during the subsistence of the marriage is then lumped together, and at the dissolution of the marriage, the spouse whose accrual, the spouse whose part of the estate hasn't had as much growth as the other one has had, would then get the benefit of the balance in the difference between the two. So there's some maths involved in the sense that there would be evaluation of both estates at the beginning of the marriage and at the end of the marriage, and the difference is determined, and that's what gets shared between the
Distributed,
parties.
I think that's very, very
distributed.
important, that the larger estates and the smaller estate is deducted from the larger estate, and the balance, the value.
The differences in value
the value,
is then referred to as the accrual,
Yes,
hence
yeah.
the term accrual.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you'll end up with the same value of the estate, both sides.
You won't lose out.
You don't lose out.
You
But
don't
this
lose
is done only at the end of marriage, at dissolution or at death.
For whatever reason. Yes.
For whatever reason, unlike the marriage in community of property, where immediately you are equal.
And the difference from a marriage out of community without the accrual, it's purely yours and
yours.
that's purely mine. So
Yeah.
there's a clear distinction between the two estates.
Nothing is shared on
Nothing
death
is
or
shared
divorce.
on death.
Thank you. Customary.
So customary law is basically traditional marriage. Okay. This is where you do not follow the formalities of a civil marriage. What then happens is that if, for instance, you're getting married now in terms of customary law, if you're still married to one wife, by default, in terms of our current law, it will be considered in community of property. If you want to get into another marriage, that's to add another wife, what you'll then need to do is that you need to draw up a contract that will then regulate how the assets, the estate is going to be dealt with, should there be, in the case of any eventuality. So it's important to understand that if you were married in terms of customary law before the Customary Marriages Act came into subsistence, it's treated differently to when you married in terms of customary law afterwards, which now then determines how if it's just one partner, it's done in community. If more partners, you then need to have a contract that regulates that. If it is before, then you also need to then at the moment come up with a contract that will then regulate that in terms of around or across.
If no contract, you are deemed to be married in community of
Precisely.
property. Your Excellency, on can you change your marital regime and what things falls out of the estate?
Oh, thank you, sir. I'll start with the things that fall out of each matrimonial regime. Like if you're married in community of property, we've been saying that everything become joint. But then there are certain specific things, like maybe you've lodged a claim for personal injury, the amount that maybe you'll sue someone for damages. That money does not, the money or the proceed of it thereof does not form part of the joint estate. And with your accrual system, out of community of property with the accrual system, then things like your donation, if during the subsistence of the marriage, you get a donation and inheritance, and again, damages.
That does not form
part. It does not form part of that.
Can you change your marital regime?
Yes, it is possible to change your matrimonial regime. What you need to do, you need to approach an attorney who's going to now make an application. Obviously, you have to divulge reasons which are compelling enough or convincing enough as to why are you intending to change your matrimonial regime. Basically, the court will be looking at three things. Are your reason compelling enough for them to can grant you leave to change your matrimonial regime? Secondly, they'll be looking at, is there any person who's likely to suffer any prejudice should they grant leave, such leave, for you to change your matrimonial regime? The third part is, have you given notice to your creditors? Particularly, this will apply more to parties who are married in
community
property. Because they have to give enough notice to their creditors to say, this is what we're intending to do. And then they'll look at it, and if they are not opposing, it's not going to be prejudicial on their side, then they'll not oppose. But basically, those are the things that one need to convince them.
But also the two parties must consent to change the marital regime.
Yes, but one last thing. On customary marriage, the rule becomes relaxed. It does not really go with the provision of the Act, because I can get married in terms of the customary marriage, that is in South Africa, paying lobola and concluding the marriage, but then approach Home Affairs and say, I want to register this marriage in terms of the
customary law.
No, in terms of the civil union.
Yes, yes.
Then you don't have to go to court and stuff. So it's only flexible if you're changing from customary
to civil.
To civil.
Okay.
Thank you.
Your final word in 1 minute.
Your Excellency, I just want to say to all the spiritual advisors, marriage counselors, I know that by default we are subjected to the Word of God, which basically makes it more sort of automatic to get married in community of property, and of which there is nothing wrong with that. However, we also need to look at the realities that we are faced with in this day. We need to look at helping the married couple through ways that will help them to build their marriage, be it in community or out of community of property. And therefore, if we perhaps don't have much information in terms of helping them, let's rather refer them to legal advisors who will sit down and counsel them so that they can make a decision which should not be emotional, but a decision that faces the reality of the lives that they're going to live each day.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I just want to thank you all for your availability, for the advice, expert advice that you've given to the viewers. It was quite informative. I also gained a lot from the exchange of information that we had. Thank you so much. And to you, the advisor, the viewers at home, we also want to thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being part of this interesting program. If you have any questions, you have any input, you want to make a suggestion, or you want to contact any of the panelists, you can write to us and look at us at our website, www.globalbusinessroundtable.com, www.globalbusinessroundtable.com. You may also email us at comments@anewthing.tv, comments@anewthing.tv. Remember at all times to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. All these things shall be added unto you. Matthew 6, verse 33. See you again next time, and God bless.